Okay, so I think we can start this session now. First of all, I want to welcome everyone for this Still Food Sovereignty section, and thank you for joining. It's very much kind of pretty exciting for us to do this first Green Family Online Council, and I hope you are also kind of enjoy it somehow. So my name is Fernando Gironda, and I'm a campaigner, a TILT campaigner. I will be moderating this session together with my colleagues from TILT. I have on the back end Rachel Teo, who will be basically helping with running the section. So for those who don't know yet what TILT is, so basically TILT is an online citizen movement that is basically fighting for a European Union that should work for all of us. So basically we run different online campaigns with, in this moment, we are basically running two long-term campaigns, two particular long-term campaigns. One is on food and health, and then another one on human rights. In this section particularly is part of the food and health campaign. So together we're gonna discuss about food, and particularly about food sovereignty, which is an issue that we are facing nowadays as well. Where the TILT team is composed by me, Theo, as I said, who is also a coordinator of TILT, Rachel, which is a campaigner as well, and then Nele, who is our colleague dealing with digital campaign. So this basically let's say the team of TILT that will run the campaign that you have seen sometime. So I'm gonna just go through the contents of this, let's say, frame a little bit the contents of this workshop very briefly. So as I already mentioned it's gonna be about food and health, where we will tackle particularly the issue of food sovereignty. As you know, this crisis basically has brought to light the fragility and instability of our current food system, and it shows that how much basically impact crises like this one that we are facing now that can have in terms of global economy, and also about the vulnerability of our food system, which basically have been affecting many people across Europe. So we want basically to tackle this with two experts that are going to explain us how can we overcome the problem of food sovereignty in Europe and also across the world. And we will have Jennifer Savigny, who is a farmer from France, and she works with the European coordination Via Campesina. And we will have also Thomas Waits, who is a beekeeper and organic farmer, and he is also a member of the European Parliament, and since last year he's also co-chair of the European Green Party. So just to give a little bit of, let's say, some technical instructions on how this meeting is going to run, very briefly. So basically the agenda is that we're going to talk about food, as I said, and then I will give the floor. The first person that we're going to give the floor is Genevieve, sorry to pronounce wrongly your name. Genevieve, who is going to be talking about what exactly food sovereignty is in practically, and how can we basically face that. And then I will give the floor to my colleague Rachel, because we want to make sure that this section is not just only about us explaining also what food sovereignty is, or our speakers talking about it, but we want also to have feedback from you, especially, and having your feedback about what you think it's mostly the problem that we are facing on this issue. So you will have the possibility to do that by basically writing in a document, which is a shared document, that my colleague will also display for you, and you can fill in there as much as possible with whatever thing that comes to your mind that you think it's relevant. So then Rachel will drive this session, and then afterwards we'll give the floor to Thomas, who will be also talking about, let's say, institutional level, what we can do. Very important thing to remind is that this session is being recorded. So if you don't want to have your name displayed or whatever, you have the option to choose to be anonymous. You can also, of course, turn off your camera. So feel free to do that. Another element which is very important is that your question, when you have to ask questions, so you have two different tools, as you can see in the screen. So one of those, the first one is basically where you can chat between yourself. So participant can just talk between yourself. Everyone can see what is written there. And the second one, if you want to ask questions, specific questions to our speakers, please drop the question in the other one with the question mark, where we can collect basically your question and then raise that. Well, so that's basically it in terms of practicalities. I want to thank you once again, our speakers, and I will start now giving the floor to Genevieve.
Hello. Well, first, hello to everybody. So my name is Geneviève Savigny. I know it's quite difficult to pronounce. So I'm a farmer, and I've been in a farmers' union, the Confédération Paysanne in France, which is member of the European Coordination Via Campesina, the peasant European movement, but also part of the global movement, the Via Campesina, which gathers 200 million of peasants all over the world. Maybe to explain very briefly what is food sovereignty, how it was launched, how it came out, we have to go back 25 years ago. And Via Campesina, with other small food producers, launched this concept in Rome during the World Food Summit in 1996. And it was at the beginning really kind of a shout. We peasants, we can feed our people. We know how to do, we've done it for thousands of years. And it was an answer to two issues. The first one was the question of hunger, and that was where the answer was focusing especially on food security and access to food, even imported, however it was produced. And the second issue was the creation of the WTO, the World Trade Organization, 1 year before, and the agreement on agriculture that was opening the borders to imported food and was really a big danger for small peasants and for small food producers all over the world. So in facing those two dangers, the peasant gathered and said, we want food sovereignty. It was really a strong answer that was heard very loud as an answer to neoliberalism that was colonizing the whole world at that time, and that's still been colonizing it ever since. But now we know what to put in front of it. We know roughly how to do. We have food sovereignty, which is a broad concept that gathers a lot of different issues and a lot of different struggles. You have all the struggles to defend our way of farming, to be able to be farmers, access to land, access to water, access to all the biodiversity, to the natural resources, because we gather not only farmers but also fisher folks, pastoralists, different types of food producers that are existing all over the world, and also the struggles for better policies, and also struggles for better trade policies, because as I said, it has been based on the creation of the World Trade Union, of the WTO, the World Trade Organization, which is really trying to put everything in the market, on the so-called free market. It also goes, the food sovereignty also supports a vision of what is farming, what is peasant farming, and is based upon peasant agroecology, which is what our organizations have developed over the past years. How do we want to grow the food? And we want to grow it in good relation with nature, not to overuse what is scarce, but using what is available in nature. So in the peasant farming that we are promoting, there is a strong relation with nature, and it is all included in this notion of food sovereignty. All this work, the forums, discussions, and that have been taking place in the name of food sovereignty, to realize food sovereignty, have gathered also a strong social movement. Many peasants all over the world have gathered and they joined the Via Campesina, but also other organizations. They got interested in this concept, and so it has built a strong movement in food sovereignty. We gathered some forum to discuss further about this issue, and maybe some of you have heard of this forum that took place. The first one was in Mali, and is called Nyeleni, after the name of a strong peasant woman, who was is a mythic woman peasant in Mali, and they had also two forums in Europe. One was in Austria in 2011, and the second one in Romania in 2016. Also to promote this idea of food sovereignty and what it means for people, for peasants, but also for consumers, and how we are going to implement it, how we are going to make it true in Europe, in our circles, in our everyday life. In Europe, a lot of work has been done around the questions of short chains, how to make better links between farmers and farmers and the consumers through different systems, including community-supported agriculture or local markets, public procurement. So it's all part of our struggles, and also the question of incorporating new young farmers. That is very strong struggles in the name of food sovereignty. So in the time of COVID, what we think is important is this idea that we need to have some autonomy on our food. Community need to have some capacity to decide what they want to eat, how it's going to be produced, and to have some resilience, to know that the food system is resilient, that we don't depend too much on imported I don't know, fertilizer, energy, whatever is needed to make farming goes. So this is how we see this question now. How are we going to make our food system more stronger and more resilient to this kind of crisis that may happen? And if it's not a health crisis, it can be also a political crisis, war, and the lack of and the impossibility to import. So this is very, very important for us to develop local production, but a local production which is based on sustainable modes of production, and modes of production which are also tackling the issues of employment and of social issues as a whole, to really be a community. Maybe I want to maybe to summarize that at the moment in Europe, in the debate, or what in the world maybe as well, you have, I would say, two visions for food and agriculture. You can see either food as a common, food as a right, something that is for everybody, that we have to get organized so that everybody has a good access to food. And the second vision is food as a commodity. And it's still very much this vision which is driving a lot of policies, especially the trade policy. And everything is supposed to be a commodity as well. But and the vision of food goes along also the vision of agriculture that we are developing. You can have either sustainable peasant agroecology, or you have a more intensified model of farming, specialized, competitive, which is very efficient somehow, but has all the problems that you all know. The problem in Europe, as we see it as a farmers' organization, is you have a lot of farmers that are kind of in between. They just want to be farmers. They don't want to make a lot of money, but they are in the competition because everybody tells them they need to be competitive, and if they are not, they will lose their job and they will lose the farm. So this is also why it's very important not to see just the situation as it is now, but where we go and where we want to go. How do citizens want to feed themselves? What do they want to eat? How should it be produced? And then what kind of policies can we organize? Can we put forward so that this kind of food and food system can be developed for all the citizens? So this is really how we see the problem now at the moment. How are we going to develop food systems and policies in that direction so that we can have a lot of peasants, a lot of farmers, they have normal, decent income, and they can produce good food for everybody.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this in-depth explanation and clarification about also the concept of food sovereignty, which I think it's a kind of not also maybe not many people still get what exactly that means in practice, and I think your explanation gives a little bit of clarity on that. I want to just invite again people to write on the document. You can find the document that I was talking before, where you can share your ideas, your points in the chat. So it's not displayed here in the let's say in the main screen, but you can find it on the chat. So feel free to just drop any feedback in there and join the section. So I would ask Rachel, my colleague, to join me in this second part of the session so that we can maybe see how can we drive, people with the interaction.
Hi, yes, I'm Rachel with Tilt. Thank you, Fernando. So it'd be great if everyone could get into this document. And if you're having trouble, maybe just put a message in the chat, but the link is in there. And so we're just gonna get to this point that starts with, how does food sovereignty relate to each of us? And I'm actually just gonna ask people to write in their answers right into this doc, and then as people have written it, I'm gonna pull out some points and maybe we can have a short discussion.
So please feel free to drop all your comments there, so we can go for discussion, make it much more interesting. We are just collecting, giving some time to people to drop their feedback. And then we will go through all those. So in the meantime, when people still bring in all their comments, I mean, one reflection that I want to kind of bring in, following also what you were saying before, I think, I mean, the question that comes to my mind is how can we basically ensure, as we were saying before, that food becomes a little bit like ensure autonomy on food, which means local production that allows, let's say, the resilience of the whole system itself. When basically we have this huge, let's say, kind of global business or global system that is so strong, and it's basically now even using the, let's say, the excuse that because of the coronavirus and the fact that people need to be fed, and also because of the growing population that we are having around the world, they need to keep this system as it is so that we can produce more food quickly and feed people as they need. How these two things can combine themselves. The fact that we need in one hand to be sustainable, local, and the other way around, where basically big companies are claiming the opposite in that sense. Geneva, if you wanna just go through that question, maybe in a minute.
No problem. So, sorry, I was not sure how I have to answer, because I've seen some questions, but I'm not sure how to answer because I'm not good with this kind of technical thing. So if you give me the floor, I speak. Otherwise, I don't know when to intervene. But well, yes, but I think business people, corporates, they will use everything that's available because this is their DNA. When there is a crisis, they will say, we need to feed the world. So it's been their narrative for years. In 2050, there will be 9 billion people. So we need to grow more. We need to feed people. It's always the same thing. But when they say this, while they say this, in spite of the coronavirus, of any other crisis, you still have the climate crisis. And you have this question that whatever you do, you need to be sustainable. You need to know that the planet has boundaries. We cannot overuse it. So their narrative is always the same. They only find new arguments when it's possible. It is just their job. They're doing their job, but we have got to do our own job of citizens and of farmers. You know, it's not possible to go on. So we have to reduce our consumption of energy, of fertilizers, of everything, because we need to adapt to the planet. I think that's simple as this. And how we do it, we have different policies coming ahead. And for the moment, they don't bring a revolution. Like I've seen a question on this, that the farm to fork strategy enables a change in the trade policies. It's not written in it. There's nothing writing that we are going to change our trade policies. But for the people who think it's important to change the trade policy, it can be a starting point. It can be a point, how do you call it? Something to, it's an argument. You say you want food to be sustainable, but then you open the borders for cheap imported food with soybean that is produced unsustainably. So I think it gives us some weapons. So it's.
Thank you very much. I didn't cut you, where I hope so. So thank you. I think we have now gave enough time to people to share their views. I'm gonna again give the floor to Rachel. If you can wrap up on this to see what's going on there.
Yeah, sorry, I keep being kind of kicked out of the room. So I think it would be great if we could sort of hear from some people from the audience. I see somebody talking about migrant workers and sort of surpluses of food. If somebody would like to speak about something they wrote down, could they just raise their hand? And then we can pull you up to hear from you. Do you have anyone raising their hand? I don't see anyone raising their hand, so maybe I'll just ask the question that I saw in the chat. Could you speak, either of you, sort of about the implication of the sort of food sovereignty situation on migrants? I know that migrants play such a pivotal role in sort of food production and food packaging, and it seems like a really sort of integral conversation. Would either one of you want to speak about that? Tomas, maybe, since we had Genevieve just before this.
Okay. So the question you're asking actually about what the role of migrant workers is. I mean, they're key in European food production, which becomes very visible now during the COVID crisis. Several farmers' enterprises were not able to actually deliver their food they had planted because of a lack of agricultural workers. And this actually points to from my perspective, to two very relevant questions. First of all, the relevance of their contribution to the society becomes obvious. And second of all, it becomes very obvious that most of the farm workers, may they be migrants from outside of the European Union or from within the European Union, are not paid accordingly to what they deliver as a service to the community. And, you know, we all have to eat. So this is a basic need. We're not talking about any luxury issues there. And they lack social security, they lack proper workers' rights, they lack representation. And it became, I mean, Via Campesina and also we Greens, we try to raise awareness to that circumstances and to the situation mostly migrant agricultural workers are in, but now we had a breakthrough in creating some public consciousness, and also I think some readiness in majorities of our population to grant farm workers at least a proper salary and some social security schemes.
Yeah, and I'm seeing in some places like migrant workers being offered permanent residency because there's a lot of risk of like migrants can't, if they can't call in for their sick day because they don't have some of those same rights, and so they're pretending they're not sick, and that puts like everyone at risk. So it's quite a tense situation, but hopefully some opportunity to actually drive forward some rights for migrant workers. Genevieve, maybe I'll pitch this question to you. I see in the document here people talking about food banks and how because of the COVID-19 crisis, food banks seem to be closed in a lot of places, and that's putting a strain on the people who are, you know, made vulnerable already by this situation. Is there something you want to maybe speak to about that?
Yeah. The question of access to food to everybody is a very important issue regarding food sovereignty, and probably an area where we should do more work and see how to tackle this issue. Very often we see how we try to design policy for the poor, but if we design policies for the poor for access to food, then it means that we have policies for the rich, which is not good. It's not sustainable. It's not our vision of a fair society. So we should have a system that is that makes it possible to have food for everybody at a decent price, but so that everybody has got access to food. In France at the moment, that we are discussing a lot a question of a kind of social security with everybody would get his expense for a basic amount of money for food paid back by fees that everybody would pay, like you pay for your health. So that would mean that would be a way to have access to food for everyone on the same level. But this is this is maybe a future, not just now. Just now, we realize that a lot of people are very precarious. They can only survive because of different little jobs and so on. And with the COVID crisis, they couldn't do it. And for this, they didn't have good access to food. And some people really got hungry during the crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we have solutions at local level. This contribution of peasants to help food banks, and but knowing that it's okay for the short term. It's something we have to do at the short term to make sure everybody has a bit of food. But you cannot base your food policy on giving away your overproduction or your waste to poor people. It's not a vision for the future. For the future, we need to think our policies and our decisions on people's need, food, lodging, having social life, care, and so on. So I think it changed all our vision. This question, when we see the limits of our systems based on trade and on liberal vision, that it's a question of sell and buy, of markets. But life is not only markets. Life is much more than that. And this is also the problem of neoliberalism, that it is reducing everything to markets. But life is not market. Food is not a commodity. Food is a right, and this is also what it brings. The kind of the discussion it brings upon this question. This crisis is a good way to see it more clearly.
Yeah, so it's like, I think we've heard, what I'm hearing from you is that, like, you know, envisioning a more empowered community initiatives and like the local level is so important in this. But I see a comment in the document, and I've been kind of thinking about this, about especially, you know, we see Jeff Bezos in the States becoming potentially a trillionaire off the crisis. And, you know, is there something that, and I'll maybe ask this question to Thomas, is there something at an EU level that can be done to sort of limit the fact that supermarkets and these like corporations that are able to sort of benefit from the fact that they have things that others need in this time of crisis, and that like supermarkets are making profit off of like this like food crisis essentially? Is there sort of, are there EU level solutions tangibly?
Okay, thank you, Rachel. I use that opportunity to actually give my input. Just one reflection on who profits from the crisis. What we see as farmers, as direct marketers, is that we have a massive increase in direct marketing. So there's a massive increase of direct citizens' demand, which they point directly to the farmers or to regional marketing schemes, which is a positive effect of the COVID crisis, as we also expect that some of these connections between consumers and farmers will probably remain for the future. But you were inviting me not as an organic beekeeper and forester and mountain farmer, but as a member of the European Parliament to reflect on what's going on actually on the policy level. And there I would like to start with the Common Agriculture Policy. This is the area of European politics which is centralized since an early stage of the Union development, 60s, 70s. I mean, there was a development behind that. And so all the questions around food markets, about food production, about the question who actually in the farmers community, but also food processing community gets actually which share of the taxpayers' money and why. This is all described and set in the rules of the Common Agricultural Policy. And this was negotiated 2 years ago in the last mandate already. A commissioner called Hogan, coming from Ireland, tried to push his agenda through before the European elections. He didn't manage, also because of the resistance that came from not only the Greens, but also others on the left side of the political sphere of the European Parliament, because we said, look, sorry, citizens should have a say on this important policy. 38% of the overall EU budget used to be spent for the farming sector, and we see the outcomes. We have a massive decrease of farm enterprises. We have a massive loss of farming families in the regions, in the rural areas. We have still a decrease of prices, so fewer and fewer farmers can actually live off the revenues of their produce. The dependency on tax revenues, or call it cap fundings, has increased substantially, and we have created a massive dependency on importation. I just mentioned animal fodder, or to be more precise, soy from mostly US and Brazil. And now this is, I guess, the most sincere problem that we caused. We have literally destroyed parts of our biodiversity, and we have massively in the farming sector contributed to the acceleration of the climate crisis. And due to the fact that at least the Court of Auditors, which is the institution that checks EU policies, whether they fulfill what they're meant for, has criticized exactly what I was formulating now, substantially, with numbers and with pointing out to very clearly to the one or the other regulation, lack of control, lack of checking whether the conditions are met, the goals are met, and so on. CAP will probably be reopened for new negotiations. This is what we're fighting for, because meanwhile, we have a new commission. Meanwhile, we had a huge climate movement across Europe, and more people in Europe are personally facing the threat of climate crisis. In the very first row in our societies, farmers, because we farmers are, I would say, most of us, the majority of us, is working in a natural environment, and we're directly affected by droughts, by floods, by extreme weather, may it be ice rain or late frost, and so on and so forth. And so even parts of the farming community have realized that there's work to do. The new commission brought up two very interesting strategies. It's the farm to fork strategy and the biodiversity strategy. And the strategy is not a law as such, but it is a policy directive that shall be implied on all European policies. So all European policies from now on should recognize and respect the strategy that has been formulated in Farm to Fork and Biodiversity Strategy. And Farm to Fork basically talks about the relations between the farming sector, the producing sector, the proceedings, so the ones that are actually using the produce, the farmer's produce, and then producing food or dishes or I don't know, cheese or whatever, yeah, in the regions or not in the regions, and the consumers and their concerns about food security, the question on how healthy is my food, but also animal welfare, the origin of my food. And also citizens are more and more concerned about the environmental impacts, especially that agriculture has. And there we come to the biodiversity strategy. This is actually based on very scary research that we have seen in the late years on the decrease of birds, a decrease of insects, a decrease of plant varieties, a decrease of species overall, and a dramatic development there. And so also this biodiversity strategy should be applied on all European strategies. And we have to be aware that European agricultural policy has an effect on the whole globe. The European strategy exactly on the commodity style, as Via Campesina was pointing out, is as I just described, a part of it is based on international trade. So we're importing millions and millions of tons of protein, mostly soybeans, from abroad, to stuff it into chicken and pork inside the European Union or inside Europe. This also counts for countries which are not in the European Union, just to re-export the meat and the produce or the products that we have produced or that mass industry has produced from these proteins to, again, half of the world, literally China and so on. And this kind of strategy makes us complicit of destroying the Amazon forest, which is chopped down to gain more land for soy production, just to raise this one example, but also complicit of losing the last rainforests in Indonesia for palm oil plantation, and not just in Indonesia, but this is a very cruel example you can all have a look into. Overall, and on top of that, what are we doing actually in Europe? We're producing to a price level that we could never produce for. So it's actually financed by your tax revenues to keep the farmers alive and to enable farmers to sell their products to a price which is far under the production costs. And the production costs and the income of the farmer is actually substituted by taxpayers' money, or call it cap fundings. And with this dumping price that has been created with your tax money, we're then flooding global markets. And believe me, in many circumstances, countries in the global south, let's take Africa south of the Sahara, are not able to compete with this price level on the markets. It has to do with the amount of subsidies that we pour into our agricultural production. It also has to do with different climate. It's much easier to produce a liter of milk in the always green island Irish meadows than to produce a liter of milk in sub-Sahara Africa. And so we were literally destroying the agricultural production in parts of the global south, in countries in the global south, fostering the ongoing moves of farmers and citizens from rural areas into the mega cities and slums of the global south. I want to end with a positive note where I see some chances to change things in that system. First of all, there were slight changes in the trade policy that are now starting to be implied. That goes not far enough, by far not. Mercosur, just to mention one very crucial free trade agreement, which I believe we should not adopt. There are tighter measurements on environmental protection in there already. So we see some positive moves, but that doesn't go far enough by far. And also we see with Mr. Bolsonaro in Brazil, a partner that is not reliable at all. So we shouldn't believe any of his words or writings. So, but at least there is a momentum of rethinking the global trade agreements. And there's a second momentum. And this is a quite interesting one. It comes from the climate side. You've seen all the intentions to raise new policies, but also money fundings to get climate neutral, to change our industry policy, also to change our agricultural strategy to become a less CO2 emitting. And in that concern, also the big businesses and the big agricultural enterprises have realized that if we step up with the production limits and with the rules that we have for production in Europe, we will not be able to stand the competition that comes from US or from other regions of the world. So the Commission is proposing a so-called border adjustment, carbon adjustment tax, which is nothing else than a climate toll. So if you want to import a produce which is not produced along European climate standards, you have to pay an extra toll. And we are heavily working on extending that principle on also the pesticides which are used abroad, but not only that, whether the environmental rules are met, but also that a minimum of social standard for peasants abroad in the global south, for agricultural workers in the global south, have to be applied, that you're allowed to import on the European market toll-free. If you're not meeting that, either you're not allowed to import into the European market or you have to pay extra tolls. And through that, I think we could change a very negative impact that Europe has on the global farmers' livelihoods and environment, to maybe change it to even a more positive one in the future. This is what we're heavily working on.
Thank you very much, Thomas. I think that's a very good kind of overview explanation, and also that includes exactly the paths that are foreseen, or the borders that are foreseen in the different institutions, including in the parliament where you work. So that's good. I mean, I would be very much interested to know how basically all these different strategies. You talk about farm and fork, you talk about the biodiversity, you talk about the CAP reform. I mean, how all these packages are going to kind of at some point come together. If there is no risk there that one, since each of those are going in a parallel way, that basically they don't at some point talk and come together in a way that brings this common aim in one only kind of position. But before we go to that, since we don't have too much time left, I just want to see if there, I mean, just to ask participants to drop their questions into the question part. So as I said in the beginning, you can always go to the question mark on your left side of the screen. You have question and answer, you can drop in there, and then I will give you the floor. You can talk directly to our speakers as well. In the meantime, I mean, where we are gathering your questions. Thomas.
Okay, I'll be super quick on that one. There's luckily a guiding principle of EU policies, which is not always met, but at least we can raise a legal argument, and this is called coherence. So European policies should be, and actually have to be, coherent. That means not one policy can pull into one side and the other one pulls in to the other side or to the other direction. It has to be a coherent approach. And on that basis, and with that argument, we try to enforce the Commission to reopen CAP negotiations on the basis of their released farm to fork strategy and biodiversity strategy, which now also has to be applied on the CAP. And this is the basis where we try to win that battle on renegotiating CAP.
Thank you very much. So people, you can raise your hand. You have the option to raise your hand in your screen. So if you wanna ask something, say something, share anything, please just raise your hand so that we know that you are asking for that, and then we're gonna give you the floor. Is there any questions from our audience? Well, in the time, while we see if someone breaks the ice around, I just want to flag very, very, very quickly that we just launched today a campaign which is called Feed Europe and not profit. Basically, it's a campaign on food and health. We mainly focus on food sovereignty. You can find the campaign in tilt.green, where we gather all our campaigns. Please, you can feel free to share that and of course sign. It's very important for us because it's the only way where we can show that this issue is something that citizens all over Europe are concerned about. So we will also make it available for any of the member parties that are interested in this campaign. You can also find it for now in English and French and German in Italian version, but we will also have another language versions in the next couple of weeks. So you can always just come back to us in case you need this campaign is also in your language. Okay, I guess we have some questions, right? So we have a first question from Ruth. Let's try to wrap up this as quickly as possible. I will give the floor now to Ruth, and Ruth is asking how can we organize actions around this issue and help the efforts of the Greens Party in the European Parliament. Ruth, questions. I mean, if you can also give the floor to her if it's technical possible.
This was pointed to me, the question?
Well, I guess so, because it's talking about the European Parliament, so it should be for you.
So again, I'd rather be short. You can have an impact by writing letters to the Commission, by signing petitions for the petition committee, by signing also petitions with the civil society. They don't have a direct legal impact, but that creates pressure on the commissioners. You can also appoint or actually contact your ministers at home, because they are the ones mostly blocking developments in the councils so on the European level, but the member states have a strong say there. And you can ask yourself, how does my fridge look like? Where's the food coming from? And what kind of food production am I actually supporting with my daily money I spend? So I think there's a lot you can do. I could actually hold the whole hour session only on that, but thank you for that question.
Very quickly question here from Nicholas is asking, since basically, does the farm and fork strategy have the potential to influence trade agreements, for example, existing ones and those not ratified, like a Mercosur, or trades with non-EU states in Europe? If yes, how?
Well, I think Thomas answered this question more or less, saying, well, this question of what's inside the trade agreement that you can push a little thanks to the farm to fork strategy and the vision, a bit broader vision. But maybe I had a question that I've seen through the question that is very important for us farmer is the question of income. If we want to have a sustainable farming system, you need to have a decent income for farmers and stable and with a long-term vision, because they will not change, they will not go along the path if needed, if they don't have some kind of stable income. It's not only it, and the income is from selling the market. And yes, we need to have better capacity to discuss on the price, whether it is for animal products or for vegetable products. But we also need sometimes subsidies that are not just linked to the hectares that you have, but linked to the work, to the workers. So it could also be social. And then you could help people who have a small farm, a lot of work to make vegetables, for instance, where you don't need to have a lot of hectares to produce. So it is very important to have this focus, and also to have trade policies that enable the governments to have tariffs, to have, if it's needed, to protect the internal market. But for us, it is important to protect internal market and that's food sovereignty, but not for any kind of farming. We don't want to support industrial farming. We want to go more into sustainable family farming, which is the model that we want to promote, and not the corporate farming. So, but as I said, in Europe, it's not so easy for some farmers to know where am I, who I am. So this is why policies are important, to give the right direction.
Thank you very much. We don't have much time. We have just 1 minute left. I just want to use this I know that we didn't manage to went through all the questions, but I hope that was let's say positive discussion that we had. And I just want to say thank you, first of all, to both of you for your participation in this conference, and also for the participants. You can also stay in touch with the Tilt via Facebook or Twitter. You can also just go and sign our campaigns on tilt.green, as I said before. Next in the next sections after this one, you will basically have I'm trying to figure out now because I don't have it in mind in my agenda, but it's basically the speech, this keynote speech with the Vandana Shiva around 4:30, sorry. So you are welcome also to join that, and invite you to do this. And once again, I would like to say thank you to everyone. Sorry for the questions that we didn't manage to bring forward. And I hope to see you next time or in the other sections during this council meeting.